Hello, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining our security webinar today. That's all going to be focusing around protecting your organisation from breaches. So we're joined here by Andy Heather from Centrify, who will be going through the webinar with you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everybody else for joining me this morning. Good morning. My name is Andy Heather. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Centrify, based here in Europe. Perhaps I should explain in the first instance the title of the presentation this morning. It was going to be a rethink of security, and I attended a conference a couple of weeks ago here in the UK with a bunch of security experts, some customers of ours, some people from the analysts and other vendors as well. I was going through some of the best practices that we've seen from some of our customers right across Europe. And one of the guys I was talking to said to me that this isn't just a rethink of security for the industry. This really should be a big wake-up call and a massive rethink of security. So no apologies, I'll steal his title. I've changed it to a massive rethink of security, and I think that's the way we need to look at this across the industry right now. And I'm going to talk about some of the best practices that we've seen for rethinking security and securing user identities across organizations, which is the #1 attack vector. So thank you for joining me once again. It's true to say that certainly by the number of reports, the number of breaches we see, the scale of those breaches, the frequency of those breaches, it's not untrue for me to say that today's security is absolutely not secure. Despite the fact that over the last year, industry has spent in excess of $80 billion in 2016 on solving security issues, 2/3 of all companies are still being breached. Even worse than that, those organizations that know they're being breached and are being breached are on average being breached 5 or more times. So despite the huge amount of spend that's being put out there to try to solve the security problem, 2/3 of those organizations are being breached, and it continues to get worse. So why is that happening? Why are organizations spending so much money and still not being able to protect themselves? Well, the landscape has changed. There's a huge rush to the cloud. There are very few organizations today that are not using cloud in some shape or form for their applications or hosting infrastructure outside of their organization. So there's very few organizations that are using data centers in the traditional way that we used to think about data centers, where we could put a security perimeter around those organizations and protect them. Today, that simply is not possible. Another stat that really surprised me was the huge number of enterprise cloud applications that are currently in use. More and more organizations are using applications that are not written in-house. They're written by third parties and they're hosted in the cloud somewhere. So again, all outside of that perimeter. The number of mobile devices continues to increase in excess of 8 billion. And again, it's more people using BYOD devices and organizations pushing applications out to the end user at the edge of their networks through mobile devices. And I'm not going to spend much time on this, but we all know that the Internet of Things is coming. How big that is and the impact it's going to be yet to be seen, but we know that there is a trend that is going to come towards us, and again, that's going to have a bigger impact on the edge of the enterprise as we used to know it. And identity is the #1 attack vector. Over 80% of breaches in some way involve weak, default, stolen passwords. And in another report that I saw recently, 80% of those breaches involve the misuse of privileged credentials. So that's privileged accounts with inside organizations. That's privileged accounts that allow you to do something special with the system or giving access to applications or the network. So When you identify the number one attack vector as being identity, it's somewhat remiss that there are so many organizations spending so much money but not actually looking to address the number one attack vector and number one threat and risk to their organizations. So talking about that, I want to go through some of the best practices that we've seen around securing identity. So when we still see that 2/3 of organizations are being breached, they're being breached 5 or more times on average. 80% we know are down to the misuse or stolen passwords or misuse of privileged accounts. We need to have a model that enables organizations to get better. And what I've done here is I've mapped this out so you can see some of the best practices that our customers are implementing to improve their security posture. Now, it's quite an easy chart to look at. On the left-hand side, we can see risk, and along the bottom vector, it's taking us towards a more mature security model. Now, it's true to say, if you think about what I've said about having identity as the number one risk vector, then if you're going to be in a danger zone, then you're going to find yourself, as many organizations do, with far too many passwords and the users inside those organizations having far too much privilege to do things that they really shouldn't, ought to, or need to do. So we want to move people from left to right. As we go through the presentation today, and I step through some of the best practices that we're seeing from our customers today, then you see our organizations trying to move from risk and the danger area to the optimized risk position on the right hand side. So again, in theory, that sounds fabulous. That sounds like a really good thing to be doing, but why should you do it? Well, Forrester looked at organizations along the maturity axis, and what they found was organizations that had implemented best practices around identity had, on average, 50% fewer breaches than organizations that hadn't moved along that maturity line. They talked to organizations, and on average, they were making a $5 million cost saving. And something that really surprised me, and I know it surprised quite a lot of people that I've talked to, is that despite being able to do this, those organizations are able to spend, on average, 40% less on technology, which is, again, something that I found very surprising, but certainly is encouraging to see that you can achieve a much better risk posture from a security perspective by spending even less on technology than you have been today, which is good news for everybody. So let me see how we can start to move along this curve and look at some of the organizations that we work with that have actually done some of this work already. So the first identity area to look at is when we've talked about organizations having far too many passwords and far too much privilege in their organization. A really good place to start is with identities. And a great place to start is to try to consolidate all of those identities. Now, this probably looks like most people's organizations, made up of endpoint mobile devices, desktops, etc. And as we all know, on our laptops and our mobile devices, we'll have a username, and in some instances, we'll have a privileged account where we're able to do certain specific things like add printers and those sorts of things that you'd want to do on an endpoint. Also, inside an organization, you're going to typically have some server infrastructure with network resources, and again, there's user accounts associated with those. There are privileged accounts, and in some instances as well, there's automation of accounts as well, where applications are talking to other applications to get things done inside of that infrastructure. Moving to the cloud, we're seeing a huge uptake inside our customers of AWS, Amazon Web Services. And again, when we're moving to infrastructure as a service, again, you're going to typically have usernames and privileged accounts in some of those areas as well. Same is true for applications, whether it's SAP, and I could go on. The first thing that you need to do is to find a way to bring all of those accounts together, all of those usernames, all of those privileged accounts, and have a single identity that can be used right across the organization. So if you are going to have a single identity and you still need to access all of those applications, all of those services, all of those facilities, all of those capabilities, whether it's from your endpoints, whether it's through that Unix infrastructure that I just spoke about, whether it's through cloud-based or get access to some of those applications, you need to be able to do that without people having to remember. You either use the same username with multiple passwords to do that. You need to find a way of doing that. And single sign-on to those applications provides a capability for users to be able to access any of the resources, any of the services throughout their organization with a single log-on capability. So those are the two things you need to start thinking about first of all. But if you are going to do that and you're going to consolidate down to a single identity and you're going to use single sign-on to give people access to all resources across the organization, you need to do it in an extremely secure way. And that's why it's important to implement something around multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication moves away from the vulnerability of simply having a username and a password that gets shared, a password that gets written down, a password that is put somewhere that makes it vulnerable to being taken, stolen, or misused. So multi-factor authentication calls into play some other type of technology, whether that is a token-based technology, whether it's some sort of remote key, whether that is a smart card, maybe it's some derived credentials that you have on your mobile device, but you're using another layer of authentication to make sure that those users that you've consolidated into a single user and given access to applications through a single sign-on are doing that in a very, very secure way. And we see companies that have implemented multi-factor authentication. Once they start doing it in one place, they make sure that they implement this right across their organization. So that's for users getting access to applications, it's for administrators getting access to resources, it's for applications to applications. So everywhere that communication is taking place, move away from passwords and use multi-factor authentication everywhere that it's possible to do so. And if you're doing so, why not layer on top of that another layer of security? And we can do that through behavior-based access. So once we know that the user is logging on, it's very easy for us to use technologies such as AI and machine learning and analytics to identify where that person is logging on, what they're doing, the sorts of activities, and you can associate a risk score with them. So if somebody's logging on from a machine that they don't typically log on from, in a location that they don't typically log on from, at a time of the day that they typically wouldn't log on to that application, then they would generate a high risk score. So there are other technologies that are coming into play around artificial intelligence and machine-based learning that enable us to add another layer of behavioral-based access control over and above what I've talked about so far. So we've moved to good. How do we get from good to even better in terms of reducing risk and moving along that maturity level? We really need to limit what we describe as lateral movement. So that's rather than having users being able to get to applications on various systems anywhere within inside the organization, or administrators being able to get access to servers, infrastructure, anything that exists within inside the organization. You need to break down zones inside the organization. Now, once you break down the organization in a methodical and thought through way, it's very easy from there to attribute roles and responsibilities to those specific areas. So on the right-hand side, you see we have an overall system administrator that has access to a number of resources, but we also have somebody that just needs to administer the PCI environment within inside this specific organization, and they are only given the rights and access to administer those servers inside the organization. And as you see, there's somebody monitoring the web admin piece of it as well, and they're only given access to those specific areas that they need to do the work when they need to do it. So establishing these zones within inside the organization is a really important thing to get done as well. Now, we're all accessing systems from the endpoint. I'm sat here today on my laptop, and you need to make sure within inside the organization that all of the endpoints, whether they be mobile devices or tablets, or they are a desktop device, are true trusted endpoints as well. And once you have that, you can build in some very nice security and policies that enforce those users that we know and that we understand and that are using single sign-on and multi-factor authentication exactly where they can come from from the endpoint. And you see in policy 1 there, Jane, she can access Salesforce, but only if she's authenticated by, in here, 2-factor authentication, and she's coming in from an endpoint that passes the security posture and make sure that it's compliant. And that security posture's probably got disk encryption and a screensaver and certificate management inside it as well. So what we're trying to do is make sure that the endpoints within our organization are trusted in a trusted mode as well, and we have policies that control those. So we're not just relying on open trust, we are controlling that within inside the organization. VPN, most organizations in some ways, I suspect, you are, or you have people inside your organization, or more often people coming into our organizations from third party, whether that's contractors or other organizations that have access to our physical on-premise infrastructure, or maybe if we've taken things into the cloud, or we're using a hosted or outsourced model, we may have contractors or partners or our customers getting access to our systems. And quite often the way to do that was to set up a virtual network and allow individuals to come in that way. It's bad practice, and we would recommend that wherever you have VPN access throughout your organization, you take a look at ways of reducing, and if at all possible, and it certainly is possible, to make sure that people do still get access, but they do it without using VPN. DevOps, we hear about DevOps more and more these days because we are seeing more agile application development, and in the past it wasn't untypical in this dynamic development environment to have people embed passwords inside of scripts and run those scripts. Again, very, very bad practice. We'd like to see people moving away from that. We see our customers moving away from that, and they're taking those passwords, and we see them using some sort of vault technology to actually store those passwords. So rather than just executing something with a password that's embedded inside of a script, they have to go and get access to that password and check it out of a vault. Now, if you're following good practice that I've talked about before, then you would need to ensure that the individual that is checking out that password is authorized to do that. They use some sort of multi-factor authentication to check that out, and then they're able to do the task in hand. So you can start to see how these separate layers start to come together. So we've got to good, we've got to better. Let's see if we can go to great. Enforcing least privilege really is the next step for organizations. In the past, what you really need to do is you need to give individuals and those privilege accounts just enough privilege to do what they need to do. So from an individual perspective, myself, I would log in as myself. I would do some tasks that I might need to do. If I needed to do a more privileged activity, my access level could be elevated to allow me to do that. I could complete the task, and then that privilege that I needed to do the task could be taken away. So you need to have just enough privilege to access the services, resources, applications that you need as an individual whilst you're doing your daily job. You might need to get access to Salesforce, for example. You might need to get access to a HR application for some specific activity, but you might not need it all the time. Those privileged accounts that I talked about as well, those accounts that allow people to do more specific system type activities inside of the organization. You need to be able to check out the password from those, for those accounts, from the vault. You need to be able to do what you need to do, and then you need to have that taken away and you put that password back in the vault again. So you only need to have enough privilege to do the tasks you need to do when you need to do it. Here's a good example. Somebody said to me, yeah, sometimes things do go wrong, and I need to log in as root, and I need to do things with inside the organization, where we describe that as that kind of break glass situation where you pick up a hammer, smash the glass, and you get the ability to do something out of the ordinary. And that needs to be done. I mean, in this example, one of the web servers has gone down, and the way not to do this is to give somebody root access, which basically means they can do anything, and give that to them on that system. And they can also do that across the whole of that system and other systems as well. So the concept of giving somebody this keys to the kingdom is a very, very bad way of doing things. Now, in the situation below that I'm explaining, is we have the same problem. The web server has stopped for whatever reason. We need to restart it. Tony is the guy that we've assigned to do the task in time. We give him the task to do, and I'll talk more about how we implement with workflow a little bit later on. But we give him the task to do. He goes in. We give him the access he needs to the system. We elevate the privilege by him having multi-factor authentication. So he's going off to the vault, proving who he is through MFA. We're elevating his privileges so he can do whatever he needs to do. He changes what he needs to do with inside the web server, gets everything going, and then we take his privilege away. So he's done exactly what he needs to do when he needs to do it. Very much controlled. And it's the same in terms of privilege being provided to other persons throughout the organization. So if we were trying to do this privileged allocation on a manual basis, it would be extremely time consuming and difficult for anybody to do. So you need to have this integrated into a workflow process, and a lot of our customers are going through the process of implementing something like ServiceNow as an example, and you need to build this into a ServiceNow environment. So if I'm a user, I can raise a ticket, I can make a request through ServiceNow. If it's authorized, then I can get increased privilege to do what I need to do. I carry out the task I need to do, and when the task is done or is done and completed, then the privilege is taken away, and then I'm back to the normal user that I was before. You see this here with as an example of lifecycle management from a user's perspective. At the top, you see we're bringing somebody on board. They're new. We're creating an account for them. We're licensing some applications for them. We're authorizing them to use it. We might be enabling them to use specific devices inside our organization. We're giving them specific policies through single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. And all the time we're doing that, we're monitoring those individuals to know exactly what they're doing. When they leave the organization, immediately we can do that. We can take away with a single click all of the resources, all of their access to all of the systems throughout throughout the organization in one simple click. So you want to manage the life cycle of people coming into the organization and leaving the organization. And finally, let's get to the optimum position. We need to audit everything that's going on. So whether that's for end users or that privileged access that I talked about, we need to be able to monitor it. So you need to have systems that enable you to do real-time video capture and the capability of being able to replay so you can see exactly all the activities and tasks that somebody's done. In real time, you may not to monitor that and be able to stop somebody doing some suspicious or malicious activity in real time. From an auditing perspective, again, you need to be able to monitor what's going on with these privileged accounts. Could be through some sort of scripting that may be going on, but you can capture that. And again, you can understand what's been going on. And this is really great from not only detecting and protecting, but it also enables us to do some deep dive forensics should there be an incident. We can go back, take a look at whatever the user or the privileged user was doing at any point in time. We can search on keywords, we can search on activities. So we're able to go back and do some very, very deep dive analysis and analytics of what people are doing. And you need to be able to access this as well. You need to have some reporting that enables you to see exactly what's going on, whether that's people getting access to applications, whether they're going to access remote infrastructure, whatever's going on through organization, you need to be able to analyze what's going on and use some of that behavioral analytics and machine learning and artificial intelligence that I talked about earlier on to take advantage of doing that. And it's not in isolation. Most organizations have a SIEM somewhere within inside their organization, so you're capturing all of the activity within inside the organization so that you can identify potential threats. And there's some great technologies out there from some of the organizations here that I've got listed in terms of building some absolutely fantastic SIEM tools that enable you to capture, report, analyze, and protect yourself from breaches. So again, you need to think about all of the other aspects that I've spoken about earlier on and making sure that you can take all of that information that you're capturing in real time and be able to feed that into the SIEM for greater analytics. So that's the risk and model that I talked about. It's real world in terms of all of the things that I've talked about are all aspects that I've seen our customers deploy, and to a lesser or greater level. But it's really interesting to see nearly every organization, whether they're an existing customer of ours or not, or a potential customer that we're hoping to bring them to be one of our clients, they are looking at this risk model from an identity perspective. And again, when you go right back to my first slide, that we know for a fact that 2/3 of organizations still being breached, even though we're spending over $80 billion a year trying to protect the organizations. We know that 2/3 of those organizations are being breached, and 80% of those breaches are directly attributed to some misuse of or stolen credentials. So it's the #1 attack vector and the #1 area that we are seeing our customers focus on, and they're focusing on it and making their organizations 50% more secure than organizations that haven't gone down this route. And while they're doing that, they're saving themselves money on technology spend as well. So it's really a great journey to be on. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's been my pleasure to spend some time with you. If there are any questions, please take them now. And if there's anything else you'd like to share with us or ask, then please let me know, and we will pick that up. So thank you very much for your time. Amy?
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Andy. So yes, as mentioned, if you do have any questions, there is a questions box just at the right-hand side of your screen. So if you pop them in there, I'll read those out for Andy. We've also got an email address there if you would like to submit any questions outside of the webinar. Okay, let me just have a quick look. So Colin has asked, you mentioned AWS. Do you also integrate with Azure?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I just used AWS as an example, but yeah, Azure is another technology. Interestingly, in most of our customers, we are seeing them using both technologies. Probably more AWS right now in a live production environment, but we're seeing both AWS and Azure being used with inside our customers. And you're absolutely right that we do work with both technologies.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question that says, can I buy a product or tool to fix each area separately?
I guess the answer to that is yes. We do see some of our customers buying specific products to address one of those areas or the other. I think the challenge that they will come back and say to us is that the problem with buying multiple products from multiple customers does tend to leave gaps between those tools where there could be security vulnerabilities. So, and again, there is a move again we've seen from customers to consolidation of vendors. I don't know if anybody on the call was with Info Security this year, but I think somebody told me there were in excess of 400 organizations there. Somebody else told me that they counted that there were 550 different security vendors all trying to solve various problems. So there's a plethora of vendors out there trying to solve specific security problems. If you can find an organization that has a platform that enables you to address all of the things that I've mentioned, it's a far better way to go, obviously, because you don't have to buy multiple products from multiple vendors and try to glue them together. It's much better if you can talk to a vendor that's got a platform that allows you to address all of those areas in a seamless, connected, joined up and risk-free way. So can you do it? Yes, you can. Is there a better, more effective and cheaper way of doing it? Yes, there is.
Thanks, Andy. The next question says, we have some areas covered. How do we address the other areas?
Again, we've seen organizations that do have some technologies deployed. They may have bought a single sign-on product as an example, or they may have bought from another organization a two-factor or multi-factor authentication product. They may have bought a end user mobile device management tool to solve the end user management. They may have bought a vaulting technology from another company. What we've seen is that, again, this move to vendor consolidation, when these organizations look at those individual spends and the management and the training and that's needed to have multiple applications, quite often it turns out to be financially beneficial for them to move to a more platform approach, and over time move away from that specific tool to solve a problem to a more platform approach, which enables them to solve the whole problem and quite often save themselves time, money, and effort as well.
Thanks, Andy. So the next question is, they said that they've got a mix of cloud and on-prem apps and infrastructure, so have a different approach for both, which is challenging and getting worse. Can I consolidate this in any way?
Yeah, again, I mentioned briefly there about Azure and AWS from a cloud perspective, but again, it's very unusual for us to see a customer that is either completely cloud or completely on-premise these days. So we tend to see people that are a hybrid of the two, as we would describe them. So again, when you're looking at solving this whole identity challenge, it's really important to take a look at an approach or a vendor or some technology that enables you to do both all of the things that I talked about: single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, vaulting, behavioral analytics, to be able to do those in the cloud as well as on-premise, because it will be moving, and most organizations are somewhere on that journey between on-premise and cloud. But again, I would always implore people, take time to look at a vendor or look at a partner that's going to help you on this journey, and really ask those questions. Is it going to work for me on-premise, and is it going to work for me on cloud? And can I do it from a single pane of glass, through a single control panel, through a single window, and control and manage this whole thing? People don't really want to be switching from their cloud tools to their on-premise tools. It seems pretty antiquated to me, and if they are doing that, I would suggest they might need a more than a massive rethink of security.
Thanks, Andy. And there's another question here that says, what is the distinguishing feature or features of Centrify over something else like Okta?
Okay, interesting question. Let me answer that from a Centrify perspective rather than an Okta perspective. When I talk about a platform approach and being able to solve all of these challenges in a seamless, joined up approach, then obviously Centrify, we have that approach, and we're able to do that for organizations, whether that's cloud-based or whether it's on-premise. So from us, our customers are coming to us and they want to work with us because we give them the capability to solve the end-to-end identity challenge of a single platform and control that from a single place. We're not unlike some of the other people that you might mention, a single tool vendor that just solves a single problem. We're looking to solve the end-to-end identity challenges that the organizations face.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. Let me just have a look. So there's a question here. So we have not really started, but know we need to, and don't have the experience. Where should I go?
Where should you go? So I don't know whether that was asking where should I go for some help, or where should I go on the maturity chart. From the maturity chart, it really doesn't matter where you make a start. Some people start with looking at single sign-on because that's a challenge that they have. Some people start looking at multi-factor authentication. Some people look at dealing with the privileged identity management piece and looking at vaulting and those sorts of technologies. So it doesn't really matter where you start. Now the challenge is if you're coming to solve this and your organization doesn't have that maturity or expertise to start on that journey, then that's a different question. And fortunately for Centrify, we work very closely with organizations such as Bytes, who really do have not just expertise in our technology, but also expertise in other technologies, whether it's in SIM or whatever else that might surround it. So my answer to that, a great place to start, fire an email, pick up the phone, talk to one of the security specialists at Bytes, and they've got great experience of our technology and implementing it with other technologies to really get you started on this journey. And they'll be there all the way to hold your hand and get you right to the endpoint. So that would be my advice. If you get the chance, talk to one of the guys in the security team there at Bytes, and they will certainly get you started and help you make your organization as secure as it possibly can be.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy. So I think that's all the questions we've got for today. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. As mentioned at the beginning, I'll send you all a link to the recording if you didn't manage to watch the whole thing. And also thank you so much, Andy, for presenting today. And if you would like any more information or would like a call back, just pop that in the feedback form at the end and we will get back to you. Okay, so thanks everyone and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much.